Hi there, I'm Vincent Bos and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing this happens every time before your ex decides to reach out. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. Check out my socials for extra content. The links are in the description. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing this happens every time before your ex decides to reach out. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you might not realise that certain things take place before they make contact. In today's podcast, I'm discussing 3 things that happen before your ex decides to reach out to you. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is they go through the single honeymoon period. Now this is something which as a dumpee you might not like to think about, but it's going to happen, so you need to get your mindset into a position where you can feel acceptance for this process, because if you want your ex back, they're going to have to go through it. There is no way that a dumper can truly end their relationship and then go back with their ex before they experience life without the partner that they've decided to end the connection with. This is how things take place. Now, of course, each single honeymoon period is going to be somewhat unique, but I can speak in a generalised context to say that generally they last between 6 to 12 months. Now, of course, this isn't always the case, and you might be the exception where your ex goes through this journey much quicker or, unfortunately, much longer. The average, as I've said, is what I see, is between 6 to 12 months. Now, it's called the single honeymoon period because it is the period of time that your ex-dumper enters the relationship and then moves forward through as a single person before, hopefully for you dumpees, wanting to reconnect. Now this doesn't always happen. There is no 100% guaranteed way to get your ex back, and sadly it does not always take place. But when it does, an ex-dumper will go through this single honeymoon period. But does this mean they will always be single throughout it? Well, again, sadly, not always the case. Your ex-dumper might go on dates, they might even get into a relationship, but thankfully, for you at least, it doesn't last very long. It's a rebound relationship and it's almost over as quickly as it began. So I call it the single honeymoon period, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your ex-dumper is single throughout it. Although most are. Maybe they go on the odd date, but I wouldn't say that is a situation where they are no longer single. Okay, they're still single in my mind until they're in a committed relationship. And those dumpers that do jump into a new connection and do say they are committed, okay, maybe that would be a situation where they're not technically single right now, but more often than not, it is a rebound and it will end fairly soon. So I call it the single honeymoon period. It lasts generally between 6 to 12 months. But what actually takes place? Well, it's a dumper living their life in a way that they felt that they couldn't during the relationship. Now, this might be something that you had a lot of influence over. Maybe perhaps you didn't like your ex spending time with their friends. Okay, maybe they were friends that you didn't feel was a good influence on your partner at the time, your now ex-dumper, and you didn't like them spending time with them. And your ex, well, unfortunately for you, they wanted to spend time with those friends. Maybe that was a problem. Maybe that is why you actually broke up. Perhaps it wasn't. But either way, one example of a single honeymoon period is the dumper spending a lot more time with friends that perhaps they didn't during the relationship. Maybe you weren't happy they were spending that time. Maybe things were so busy they just couldn't, even if you were not bothered if they did or did not. That is a great example of what a lot of dumpers do. They fall back into friendship groups that maybe they lost track with a little bit. They lost contact with due to your relationship. Now, it's not always about friends. Sometimes it might be that your ex-dumper wants to experience something that they couldn't within your connection. Maybe they want to travel the world. Maybe you weren't interested. Maybe they just couldn't do it within the relationship dynamic. But now they're free, now they're single, now they're going to travel the world. And when they come back, 9-12 months later, there is another example of where the single honeymoon period ends and your dumper may be in a position where they start to reconsider what they did by ending the relationship. Remember, what we're talking about today is this happens before your ex decides to reach out. And your ex, the dumper, if they get to that position where they want to reach out to you, well, they're going to have to go through that single honeymoon period. Because if they end a relationship, they're not going to decide, oh, actually, I want to contact my ex, I want to get back together. They're not going to get to that point until they've experienced life without you. Else, what was the point in ending the relationship? Somebody ends a relationship when they lose enough romantic emotional attraction for it to hit the necessary low point for them to think, I want to experience things outside of this. I do not feel that this relationship is fulfilling for me at this time. Now that, as a dumpee, might sound scary, might sound sad, it might sound unbelievable, but that's the truth. If your ex-dumper didn't feel that they wanted to experience different things, they wouldn't have ended your relationship. They would have stayed with it. Somebody only ends a connection when that level of attraction has dropped to a point of where they want to experience life outside of that connection. And if and when they get through that, this quote-unquote single honeymoon period, this is when the dumper may start to reflect and think, you know what, I actually want to reach out to my dumpee. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And point number 2 is you give up. Now as a dumpee, you, if you're listening to this podcast, you want your ex back. That's why you're listening. And you're at the stage where you're thinking, I want them back. What do I do? What is the paint by numbers advice? What is the ABC? Well, sadly, it's not as easy as that. Sadly, this isn't a mathematical equation where we can just say, right, do this and you get your ex back. Instead, it is more of a free-flowing art form where you can increase your chances and you can decrease your chances, but nothing is guaranteed. You might have moments where you feel confident you'll get your ex back. You might have moments where you don't feel confident at all. The likelihood is, but as the days, weeks and months tick by, you're going to be moving between these mindsets, moving between these thought patterns. Sometimes you're fairly confident, sometimes you're unfortunately fairly unconfident and feeling down. Now, I would suggest that most of the time when an ex-dumper reaches out to their dumpee, ironically enough, the dumpee has given up. They've given up getting their ex back. Now, why is this? Some people would suggest, but it's some type of spiritual situation almost where your ex-dumper can tell that you have actually given up hope, and at that moment, that is when they'll come back to you. You know, they will only come back to you when you properly give up hope. I don't believe it's that type of situation. I don't believe that there is a spiritualism as for why your ex-dumper believes and knows somehow that you've given up and therefore they're going to come back at that time. No, I believe what we see instead is a combination of 2 important things. First of all, a lot of time has passed. Now, most of the time, your ex-dumper is unlikely to reach out to you until at least 6 months or so post-breakup. That is what I have seen through my own research. Now, you might get lucky. You might hear from your ex much sooner. You might, unfortunately, hear from them much later down the line, a year, 2 years or beyond. 6 months or so is about average that I see, that 6 to 12 month mark. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means a good chunk of time has happened. Now, if a good chunk of time has happened, you as a dumpee are going to have gone through many different thought processes, as we've already said, ups and downs. But the likelihood is that when you are 6 months or beyond, this is when you might start to get to that point where you do start to feel, you know what, I'm giving up. I'm giving up on ever getting my ex back. I've tried. I've done this, I've done that, I've done the other. I thought they would come back and they haven't. I'm starting to give up. So we can see one of the things in this equation is time. Now, the other side of the equation is you as a dumpee hopefully growing as a person, improving yourself and starting to live your life for you. Now, why does this matter? Well, this matters because if you're living your life for you, you're not chasing your dumper. And if you're not chasing your dumper, that means they have opportunity to miss you. If, for instance, you were dumped, and in the first few weeks or first few months, you're constantly texting your ex, they are not likely to want to reconnect with you. They are not likely to miss you. You are still in their life. So we can see time plus you as a dumpee starting to live your life for you, doing things for you and not them. What does that equate to? Well, it equates to a possibility of your ex-dumper actually starting to miss you. And if they start to miss you, that is when they're going to start to regrow romantic emotional attraction in their mind and eventually hopefully get to the point of reaching out to you. So when we're talking about today's podcast, this happens before your ex decides to reach out to you. Well, often the dumpee has given up, but they are not receiving contact from their dumper because they've given up. It's just because for them to have given up, for you as a dumpee to give up, the likelihood is a lot of time has passed and you're now more focused on your own life, your own journey. Maybe you've even met someone that you like better than your ex. And you think that's typical. When I didn't have anybody, my ex-dumper didn't text me. But now I'm with someone new, they're reaching out. Do they somehow know this? Well, no, I don't think they do, unless they've been told, of course. But the reality is, time has passed, you're living your life for you, you're not chasing your ex. These things combine, and now your ex-dumper has decided to reach out to you. Now, if you would like advice and support about how to try and increase the chance of one day getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website, www.dateme.tips, for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. Talking about your feelings can also improve your mental health. It helps prevent the build-up of negative emotions, which can lead to stress, anxiety, depression, and even physical health issues. Speak your heart to free your mind. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast. If you feel that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description. And point number 3 is they nearly reach out. Now that might sound kind of confusing. Today we're speaking about this happens every time before your ex decides to reach out. And point number 3 is they nearly reach out. But let me explain. When I've spoke to dumpers, and I've spoke to many, many dumpers over the years, they often tell me that when they decide to reach out to their dumpee, this isn't the first time they've thought about it. In fact, they've often come to this crossroads and thought, should I, shouldn't I? And then they haven't. Now, this might sound, from a dumpee's perspective, as very frustrating. Like, what? My ex-dumper could have reached out to me a long time ago and they didn't? How infuriating is this? But it's part of the process. Your ex-dumper will only reach out to you when all of those stars align. They need to have grown enough romantic emotional attraction. They need to feel that intrigue. They need to feel that wonder. They need to miss you. They need to feel the time is right. And although they will, hopefully, for you as a dumpee, get to that point where they do reach out, what you might not realise is that they perhaps have come pretty close a number of times before. Like I said, many, many dumpers have told me that if and when they reach out to their ex, this isn't the first time they got close to doing so. It's not like they never thought of their ex ever in 9 months and then just reached out to them. Most of the time, a dumper will have 2, 3, maybe more moments where they nearly reach out and then think better of it. Now, why do they think better of it? Well, it could be for various reasons. Maybe they haven't regrown enough romantic emotional attraction. Maybe it's on that borderline. Perhaps, instead, they were about to reach out to you when something happens. Maybe a third party, maybe a friend of a friend, maybe a mutual acquaintance or whatnot, passes on information to your dumper about you, which isn't necessarily in the most positive light. Who knows? That is just one potential example, and it might just stop the dumper reaching out to you. Now, what do I mean by a friend of a friend saying something negative? Well, I don't know, for instance, for examples of what that could mean for you, but it's why I do say be very, very careful about what you say to people who know your ex. If you have mutual friends, be very, very wary, because anything you say to them is likely to go straight to your ex, and not only is it going to your ex, it's going to naturally be twisted just a little bit. It doesn't mean that your friend of a friend is deliberately trying to be negative and trying to cause problems. It's just how things are. You know how when you pass information on to somebody and it goes through 2, 3, 4 people and it eventually gets to the other person, it's often changed? Well, that can happen to your ex as well. So you've got to be very careful about what you say, very careful about what you put out on social media. If you put things out online, make sure they're positive. If you speak to a mutual friend, make sure you're positive. I'm not saying that you can't release your emotion about how you feel about your ex, your breakup and things. Of course, you need to. It's very, very important. That's why I have an audio coaching service, because I'm obviously someone who doesn't know you or your ex. I can't cause any problems between you. You also, I'm sure, have friends and family who don't know your ex. Again, they are great people to speak with, but please don't speak with those mutual friends who might pass information on. Because like I've said, most dumpers will consider reaching out to their dumpee, but then change their mind. And it could be anything that does so. There could be various potential reasons, but we need to eliminate as many of those as possible. So when we consider about what happens every time before your ex decides to reach out to you, well, it's likely that they've had a few false starts. They considered it, they changed their mind. And we need to try and reduce those situations where they change their mind, because it's very frustrating for you dumpees. If you hear from your ex 2 years after you were dumped, and by then you've already moved on, okay, well, if you've moved on, you're probably happy anyway, but you might still be frustrated to hear from your ex, and then to find out that they considered reaching out to you after only 5 months. And that could have changed everything for you and for them. But they didn't, because something happened, something altered it. And it's so important that you live your life the right way, so you reduce the possibility of your ex-dumper getting to those crossroads and changing their mind at the last moment. Because we don't want to delay something which could be positive and could be coming to you. Not all of you will get your ex back, but those who do likely would have had a situation where the dumper would have tried to reconnect actually much sooner.